When it comes to openness and honesty, we can only meet people to the level that they've been open and honest with themselves. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll tell you a little story to set the stage. In email conversations with someone, we were going back and forth about experiences we've been having, doing some open sharing. And at some point, this person wrote to me saying that I was so open and honest and that it came so naturally to me. And I remember feeling a little defensive when I first read that, because I've done a lot of work through the years to get to the point where I'm at today, and by no means am I as open and honest as I would like to be. So I had to write back to the person and explain that, first of all, their comment was very helpful because it caused me to go inward and look at my level of honesty and openness. But also, I took some time to explain that it took a lot of practice, that it took a lot of self-awareness and a lot of reflection and a lot of practice. And after the email conversation, I spent some time and I went inward and I reflected on my process. What has gotten me to where I am today? What were the influences? What were the factors that came into play? Who am I? Which never can be answered. And in the looking, I discovered that it seems like we're taught very early on, and it was reinforced for me through most of my life, that openness and honesty are admirable. They're ways of being that we should aspire to. At least that's the rhetoric that I hear. That's the language that I was told and taught. But the further I looked, I started to recognize that hidden in that was a limitation, that you're only allowed to go so far in your level of openness and honesty. For example, there are certain things that are private, that we don't share with other people. Income, politics, everyone says such a heated subject. We're kind of trained and taught not to go too deep into the experiences we're having. Keep it on the surface, keep it light. And through this looking, I realized that it wasn't until I started to break down those barriers that things started to change and things started to shift in the way I experienced myself and others in the world. I can remember times in my life having conversations with people and wanting to go deeper, wanting to connect, for lack of a better word, but not knowing that that's what I wanted. There was just this sense of somehow after the interaction feeling deflated, feeling as though I wasn't heard, or it just didn't meet up to this inner yearning that I had. And it took a long time for me to figure out what that was. And the way to figure it out, the way to get a feel for it, is by looking, is by going inward and looking at what is my experience while I'm interacting with this person. What is my experience? And you can look at it afterwards. What was my experience while interacting with that person? Was I genuinely listening? Or another very good question is, when reviewing or reflecting back on a previous conversation or previous interaction, where was I not open? Where was I not honest? Was I trying to manage that person's image of me? In what I was saying, was it all about me? Was I genuinely listening? All of these things can come into play. And pick any one. You pick whichever one speaks to you in that moment of reflection. And it'll be obvious which one, because it's the one that you're going to hold your attention on. Spend some time with it. So see, when you go inward like this and you start to look, so for example, maybe ask yourself the question, where was I not open and honest. And if something surfaces, that's the time to go in and say, how is it for me right now when I'm reliving or replaying that moment where I wasn't open and honest or I wasn't genuine? And you begin to notice, and this is the student of experience practice, because in that noticing of what our experience was, we have all the information we need in order to make change. And we can tell if change is needed or if change is going to be beneficial through the experience. Our physical sensations, were my legs tight? Was my chest tight? Was I feeling comfortable and relaxed? And over time you'll start to notice, and I've definitely applied this and experienced this in my life, hence the reason I'm out here sharing it with others. The more you look, the more you can start to notice what your experiences are. And so when I asked the question, were my legs tight? Was my chest tense? Was I relaxed? It's not until we start to look that we can establish a barometer for what relaxed is. I don't know what my being relaxed is until I look at it a few times and I start to create a scale in my mind of, okay, this is relaxed and this isn't. So physical sensations, also our thoughts. What was I thinking when I was talking with this person? Was I focused on them? Was I listening? Or was I thinking about what I was going to say next? What we're thinking about when we're reflecting back and we see what we were thinking about, again, gives us information. We start to recognize and build that baseline for what's it like for me when I'm genuinely listening to another without being invested in what I'm going to say next. I'm just listening. And then the third area that we can look at is emotions. What was I feeling? Was there a sense of anxiety? Was I anxious? Was I waiting for the person to stop? Whatever it may be. And again, the more we look, we can establish that baseline on what our feelings are and what we're experiencing in any given moment. All of these give us information that we can use, that we can start to apply in our self-awareness practice and in our day-to-day interactions with others. Then when we discover a time or a topic or an item around which we are unable to be open or honest, we've got barometers to measure against. And we can see how unsettling it is for us when we contemplate, for example, sharing something that we normally wouldn't share, something that was private. And it's only when we start to be, how do I want to say this? It's only when we start to recognize the experience in ourselves when contemplating or confronted with our own openness and honesty that things will start to change and we will naturally start to find ourselves be more open and honest. Well, how does that happen? Well, through the process of looking, through the process of going inward and saying, okay, what was my experience during that moment? We also start to identify the things that we're reluctant to be open and honest about. And in conjunction with that, we're starting to identify, okay, I know that that's something that I'm uncomfortable being open about, and I know that based on the experience that I had. Okay, so then we can take it one step further, and every time that we start to have that experience, we can bring attention to it. And there's nothing else to do, just bring attention to it. And the bringing attention to it brings to our awareness the less than peaceful experience we're having. And the more often we do that, the easier it becomes for us to take that step and move into that area of discomfort. Because it's in the discomfort where we learn, where we grow. Once we've done it once or twice, you start to recognize that what's on the other side is wonderful. And then we begin to break down those barriers. And actually what we're doing is we're looking at the things, the obstacles, the things that are preventing us from being open and honest. I learned over time that my sense of not being able to join with others or feeling deflated or like the interaction was less than I was hoping for was a direct result of me. It was a direct result of my inability to be open and honest, to be genuinely present with the other person. It was a direct result of my guardedness. I was wanting the other person to be open and honest, but I wasn't able to do it myself. And the entire interaction left me wanting. And it wasn't until I started looking at those experiences, it wasn't until I brought attention to my experience as someone who's not being as open and honest as I want to be, that things started to change. And they change over time. Occasionally, there'll be a big change that comes and it happens overnight, and it's this big aha moment like, wow, this is fantastic. But more often than not, it's a gradual process, and it can be very unsettling. However, for me, the experience of not connecting, of not joining, of not feeling heard by another, that feeling became so unbearable that the potential pain or the potential discomfort that came with looking at the obstacles was actually less than the actual experience in itself. And once I looked and found one thing that I could be a little bit more open and a little bit more honest about, and I did it, and I tried it out in the world, and recognized, wow, I survived. I'm fine. I had this story in my head that it was going to be this terrible traumatic thing, that everything was going to change if I was open about such and such. And then once I was able to do it and be open about it and realize, wow, nothing changed. In fact, I'm a little bit more peaceful than I was, and I know myself better than I did before. I was off and running. And that's what happens. It's the first one. It's that first step of bringing attention to our experience that can be the most difficult. So all I can say is, if you're watching this video, something drew you to this, maybe it's been helpful. If you have the willingness, next time you find yourself not connecting in the way you want, or not joining in the way you thought you wanted to, or something that feels empty or hollow, or use whatever word you want after a conversation or interaction with another, take a moment, be still, and reflect on that experience. And ask yourself questions like, where was I not able to be open and honest? Where was I trying to manipulate or manage that other person's picture or idea of me? Where was I not genuinely listening to the other? Where was I, when was I so focused on, I was preparing what I was going to say next that I didn't even hear what they said? Any of these questions are fine. Whichever one is the one you're supposed to pay attention to, it'll be obvious, because that's the one you'll hold on to. That's the one you'll spend the most time with. And spend time with it. Be still. And when you're reflecting on it, as I said earlier, notice what's happening. Notice if your legs are tensing up or if your body's getting tight. Notice if you're not taking nice, deep, life-giving breaths. Notice if you're holding clenched fists. Notice the thoughts that are going through your head. And it's this practice. It doesn't take long. Do it for 10 seconds. Over time, the practice starts to strip away those experiences, and then we find ourselves being more open and more honest. And as a result, we find the connection and the joining that we've longed for with other people. They don't have to be there. That's the other thing that's fantastic. They're going to be at the level of openness and honesty that they're at. But our experience, because we're being more open and honest with ourselves and with the person we're interacting with, we start to experience deeper levels of connection.